My role as Associate Vice President for Sustainability is to really provide academic leadership across all the business operations of the university, but primarily around teaching and learning and research. So one of my main targets for the university is to try and ensure that every single one of our students, regardless of what discipline they're studying, regardless of what level of degree they're studying, but to make sure every single one of them is encouraged to engage actively with the environment and sustainability agenda in one way or another. So to this end, we work with partners across the whole of Manchester to involve students in environmental projects and outside organisations, linked to their dissertation projects, linked to volunteering, and linked to placement opportunities, linking to careers progression and the like. So what's very important to us is to involve all students in the sustainability agenda. I'm also very keen to optimise research collaboration across all our research groups. So under this broad theme of sustainability, we have well over 100 research groups looking at various aspects of the environment and sustainable development. One of the real challenges is to bring together those research groupings to address cross-disciplinary problems, and I think certainly transport issues are truly cross-disciplinary in the sense that you have the engineering context, you have the scientific context, and you've got the socio-economic and political side of things. So, say a little bit about the university itself now. We're the largest university in the UK. And one consequence of that is we have the largest carbon footprint of any university in the UK. And we're one of the largest contributors to Manchester City's carbon footprint. So to that end, we have some pretty demanding targets around reducing our carbon emissions. And some of these do relate to travel and transport, particularly around business and commuting travel. So as well as our research interests, our curricular interests, the university is very keen to play a broader civic role in the transport agenda for Manchester and more widely. I think that's probably enough for me for now. Now I have great pleasure to introduce Brian Simpson, MEP for North West and Chair of the European Parliament's Transport and Tourism Committee. So Brian, do you want to come up here or stay there?
No, I won't be here. Thank you very much for the introduction, and thank you very much for the invitation to come and speak to you all this evening in this rather grandeur surroundings that we have. We don't get many buildings like this in the European Parliament, I have to say. They tend to be more like Pilkington Memorial buildings that we live in, all full of glass and steel and so on. So it's nice to be in a room that's got acoustics as well. So thank you for the opportunity. I'm going to speak for about 10 minutes, 15 minutes, and then I rather foolishly agreed to stay on the panel so that people can ask questions, because you'll be aware that politicians like to speak, but they don't like to receive questions afterwards. But okay, I'm trying to break the habit, and we'll see what comes out of that question and answer session. I want to speak on 3 areas, if I may. One is the general policy in Europe on transport plans and what we see as the future. The second is a little bit on Horizon 2020 and how important we see the research side of it. And then I've also been asked for my views on HS2, High Speed 2. That won't take a long time. The last bit, I mean. And I'm more than happy to give you my views on that. If I start by the general transport policy, there are 2 major priorities now for the European Union in transport, and in particular the European Parliament. One is urban mobility, and how we can ensure that our big cities and towns and urban areas can keep people and goods and freight moving. And the other is the trans-European networks, and in particular the major core core projects of the 10T, and in particular, how we get across borders. Now, if I tell you, ladies and gentlemen, that in the days of steam locomotives, you know, those wonderful, beautiful machines with steam locomotives, Europe's railways were more interoperable and more trains crossed borders than Europe's railways of today. You might ask, why is that so? Well, there's two reasons. One is, of course, with all the technological advances, every state technologically advanced to their own systems, and then somebody suddenly realised that they didn't all link in. And secondly, there is still this attitude, particularly in railways, of protectionism. We know best, let's just stick to our national considerations. So the net result of that is trains don't cross borders. There are some notable exceptions. Channel Tunnel, the Eurostar is one, but even Eurostar suffer from a thing called the Treaty of Canterbury. Now, hands up, who has heard of the Treaty of Canterbury? Emma. If you ever go on Pointless on television and they ask you treaties, you say Treaty of Canterbury, because unless you've been very unlucky, and Emma's been one of the people they've asked, you will get the jackpot. But the Treaty of Canterbury is the treaty that governs the use of the Channel Tunnel between Britain and France. And at this moment in time, it's that treaty that is stopping rail freight going through the Channel Tunnel. It was that treaty that the French tried to use to stop Siemens building trains to go through the tunnel. I just use it as an example of even where we have got a cross-border rail connection, there are still blockages put in the way to expanding that service. So one of the key issues for the European Parliament is getting trains across borders, is getting freight efficiently across borders. We don't have a problem in roads. Lorries are interoperable, but trains are not. And that is one of the challenges we face here in 2013 in transport, if you look at it from a European perspective. And that's one of the difficulties within the European Union. We look at it in a European perspective. I look throughout the whole of the European Union at transport plans and what people are doing, seeing stuff here today. I spend a lot of my time in other major cities looking what they're doing. But sadly, national governments do not. They see transport purely in nationalistic terms, not in international terms. And that creates a problem. If I tell you that since I became a Euro MP in 1989, we've had 37 Secretaries of State for Transport. 37. 32 of them are still alive. And of those 37, their tenure has ranged from 2 years and a bit, Andrew Adonis, to 1 week, Helen Little. What does that tell you about the Secretary of State for Transport? It tells me that the Secretary of State for Transport is not seen as an important cabinet post in governments. And frankly, you're either going up the greasy pole when you make Secretary of State for Transport, or you're coming down the greasy pole. I remember Mr. Hammond telling me that he was leaving because he'd been promoted to the Minister of Defence. And when I pointed out to him that we now had an army of less than 75,000, a navy of only 20 ships, and an air force that couldn't afford to buy the new Eurofighter, I asked him to explain to me how that was promotion. But the perception, ladies and gentlemen, was that going from transport to defence was promotion. And I make that point because I think we need to get transport higher up that political agenda so that it is seen as not only as a key government office, but one of the major government offices. And it's only when that happens do I believe we get delivery for transportation when the cake is divvied up by the Treasury. And that's not just a British problem, believe you me. It's a problem across the whole of Europe. I mentioned urban mobility. Most of Europe's citizens live in towns and cities. Indeed, the trend is still going on in the European Union of people moving from the countryside to the cities and towns. So there needs to be structured plans on urban mobility that are not only sustainable, but are environmentally friendly as well. And there are many projects going on. I've seen Civitas here today. There are others which the European Union supports that are trying to look at that particular issue of urban mobility. And their thinking in Europe is that we have to, first of all, not reinvent the wheel. So let's bring together best practice to see how it can work. And secondly then, how do we persuade the people that the best way to get into a city is either by public transport or by environmentally friendly transport? It's a difficult task, ladies and gentlemen. In the past, people used to tell me that an Englishman's home was his castle. Now his home is his car. And it's not just that we have one car in a family, it's that every member of the family has a car. And that, frankly, isn't sustainable. But we can't go and say to people, you can only have one car or two cars. What we have to attack is how that car is run and what it's run on. And that brings me on to Horizon 2020. Because Horizon 2020 is our attempt to highlight the need for research, not just research in urban mobility, but research in even wider, more complicated forms of technology. For example, we're looking very closely at the moment in a project called Blue Maritime, Blue Med it's called, in which we are looking at alternative fuels for shipping. Shipping uses the most pollutive heavy fuel going. And there are many projects involving Stena, which if people want to ask me questions about later, I'll expand upon. But there is still this dilemma, and you see it in the car as well in the city centre or the bus. What do we do as the alternative to oil? Do we have electric cars? Do we go for gas cars? Do we go for ethanol? Do we go for fresh air? What do we go for as the viable alternative to the petrol engine or the diesel engine? And there needs to be a constructive discussion amongst everybody to decide what that best system is. My worry is Manchester might go for electric, Liverpool goes for ethanol, Paris goes for something else. And when we do that, it defeats the whole object of what we are trying to do. So I need the brains, the universities, to look at what we can do to harmonise the alternative to the petrol engine or the diesel engine. We're having big budget discussions in the EU at the moment. The Council, the Member States, including my own Member State, want to slash the EU budget. It makes good politics. It's good for Newsnight. It keeps Nigel Farage happy. But the net result of that is that if we go along that line, then the research budget that we're putting in the transport will be slashed even further. Now, at this moment, I'm happy to say to you that there will be an increase in the budget of the Horizon 2020. But we have to prioritise where that money goes. And a lot of it will go into research on alternative fuels and on rail, the shift to rail project some of you may have heard of. Because that's where we think the difficulties lie, particularly on the interoperability side of things and the integration side of things. But that doesn't mean to say that we're going to drop Civitas or drop others, Marco Polo and things like that. We're not. We're going to try and keep going with that. But be aware, ladies and gentlemen, there are severe budget constraints being put on us by the member states, or attempted to be put on us by the member states, which in my view will not help. Before I go on to High Speed 2, I want to make a plea, something close to my heart. And being here at Manchester University in the engineering faculty, it's something that I am deeply concerned about. We in Europe, and I take Europe, are not producing enough graduates or skilled people in engineering. When the aerospace industry tell me they need 27,000 graduates a year coming out of the EU's university in aviation and avionics, and there's only 20,000 coming out, that tells me there's a problem. When I look at, even on my own smaller scale, my heritage railways, when I can't get boilermen fitters or engine fitters, and we're having to start our own apprenticeship scheme to do that, rightly so. We're having to do that. That tells me there is a problem. Now, I don't know what it is, but I've done addresses to universities and I have seen some wonderful students. But how many of them came from the European Union is a question that has to be asked. I'm not one for denying students from other countries to come onto our universities. I encourage it. But I want to know, where are our students coming in and doing the courses as well? Because unless we address that problem, ladies and gentlemen, the skill shortage that people go on about at this moment in time will just get worse. And it'll get worse at the top level, the engineers, the degree people, and that will filter down then to the craft apprenticeship level. And call me old-fashioned, plead guilty to it, 9 times out of 10. But what I want to see coming back is the old craft apprenticeship, where somebody is taught a trade and is taken through that training to become skilled at the end of it, and they can then go into the workforce. So it's a plea. I know it means people getting their hands dirty, but nevertheless, I do think that is a problem that not only that this nation faces, but the European Union as a whole faces. Finally, High Speed 2. Well, I'm from Wigan, so we're in favour of High Speed 2. If only because it's cheesing off the south of England. But no. There are 2 reasons why I think High Speed 2 is important. The first is the need to link the north of England into the mainland of Europe. You heard me talk earlier about this difficulty of getting trains across borders and getting international travel done properly. If we don't have High Speed 2, those difficulties will still happen. We'll still have the person wanting to go to Brussels by train, having to catch the train at Piccadilly, get off at Euston, walk past that lovely old fire station, hoping it's not pinning it down with rain, to get onto the international train into Brussels. Or he will take the other option, which is he'll just go to Manchester Airport and get the flight direct to Brussels, a 1-hour flight, which is what I do. Now, which is the more environmentally sustainable? The train. Which is the more convenient? The airport. So until we can get the train being as convenient as the airport over those distances, then people will still take the aircraft. So we need to link in the north of England with the rest of Europe, and we need to do it quickly. And the second point is this: if we don't build a high-speed 2, then capacity on the West Coast main line is now full. If we want to move more freight trains on the West Coast main line, we won't be able to do it. It's bad enough, it's hard enough now to get a path for the freight train on the West Coast main line, without trying to get a path if it becomes even more crowded with passenger trains. And anybody who thinks, well, the 30 or 40 billion, pick a number, anybody who thinks that if we don't spend that on high speed 2, the government will say, well, I'll tell you what, boys, here's 30 billion for the West Coast main line. They are living in cloud cuckoo land. It will disappear into the ether of time, never to be seen again. Because the only reason why this project is taken off as well is not because it's a purely good transport project, it's because of what it brings in other economic and social benefits by way of jobs, etc. And that's why it becomes worth it. Now, people say about the cost going up. The costs have got to be controlled, there's no question about that. But I can see that project billions at a stroke. Stop digging holes in the world. Stop trying to get around objections by thinking that tunnelling is the answer to all our problems. Because, ladies and gentlemen, we could end up with a high-speed 2 from London to Manchester that goes underground just outside of Euston and comes back up above ground just outside of Longside. If we keep carrying on pandering to people who are objecting to it. So stop digging holes in the ground, because digging holes in the ground costs a lot of money. And let's get on with it. I finished by a quote from Brian Simpson, who's the head of SNCF. And I met with Mr. Pepe, very nice man. And I said, Brian, when you built the high-speed line from Paris to Marseille, how did you plan it? How did you know what the route was? And he looked at me a bit strange and said, what do you mean, Brian, what the route was? Well, how did you know the route of the line from Paris to Marseille? What did you use to design that route? And he said, a ruler. A ruler. We took a straight line and that's the way it should go. And I believe we should be looking to that kind of similar attitude in building high-speed 2. We need high-speed 2 in the north. We need it badly. I'm a big supporter of it. And I really would ask anybody who is supporting it to get behind it, because it needs support at the moment. Has it had good public relations? No, it hasn't. Has it had a disastrous public relations? Yes, it has. But you know, what we need now is to go forward with that scheme. Because the other thing Brian Simpson said to me, when I said to him, when you decided to build a TGV sub, what time span did you decide to do it in? They said, well, that was a big discussion, Brian, because we thought 7 years was a bit too long. 7 years. What is it we're talking about? 2030? 2032? I hope, ladies and gentlemen, I'm still here to travel on it. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Brian. Nice feeling how to use that things. I think to get the discussion going, I'd quite like to bring in the other two panellists who haven't had a chance to speak yet. Firstly by introducing them and then giving them a chance to speak about one of the key themes of this discussion, which is innovation. So I'll introduce them first of all, so you know who they are. So immediately on my left, I've got Peter Stoner, who's from Travel Line, who when asked him earlier what characterises him, he says he's a bit of an open street map person. So, I'm not sure what that is, but he might explain. And also I'd like to welcome David Hyche, who, for the people who were at our discussion last year on road user charging, will know that David put some very forthright views there last year, so we've invited him back again this year. So David is, I believe you're still the Information Director for Transport for Greater Manchester. So maybe, Peter, if you could give some thoughts either in response to what you've heard so far, or just what your thoughts are on innovation.
Thank you very much. Yes, you're sort of a bit of an open street map person, but my background perhaps in town planning, training, transport economics, geography, these are the things that interest me and motivate me. But I have been very much involved in transport information for perhaps all my career, believing that actually getting the information out is a very crucial part of transport policy. And if however good your infrastructure, however fast your trains might be, if the information doesn't guide people to the right transport choices, then they're not going to end up in the right place or make the right decisions about their movements. That's why I sort of feel that transport information is a very important aspect of the mix in transport discussions and policy, and it's motivated me for a long time. Just three things really to focus on, which I think are going to be and are increasingly important to my outlook on what we need to do. Disruption information, and how we not how we design systems for when everything is working fine. Because actually often you don't need an information system when everything's working fine, you know what to do. And I think of my early experience, and perhaps a lot of the early efforts at designing information systems were when the sun was shining and when there wasn't a problem. And when it didn't, when it rained and things collapsed, we said, oh, write that off. We'll come back another day and we'll do our perfect transport information another day. Crucially, people need information when things go wrong. And that is when they judge the systems. And we need to be thinking of all transport not for what it will achieve in the finest technological day when everything works fine, but how does it cope, and how do people get the quality of journey when things have not gone as expected? How are they helped? And of course you can see how customer service comes in, but information is crucial, and it's a very difficult area to work on. What is the information that people really need? We don't know much about it. We need more research into that to understand that. And I'm sure another area that much of the work needs to be on is fares. And making the whole basis of how transport is paid for, really, sorted so that it's both easy, not only to make a physical transaction, but easy to be guided in your decisions. And so linking that with my third, perhaps, thing, very personally, and I do have to say when we're looking ahead, I'm not really speaking on behalf of my employer on this. We haven't got policies for a lot of these things. These are very much personal views about transport. Then I increasingly question or think, well, what decisions am I personally making about transport, and why? And what am I going for? Last evening, I travelled up from London. I stayed at Crewe actually last night. I spent just £22 on it. It took 3.5 hours. I got a first class ticket for that. and I had 3.5 hours reading magazines that I haven't been able to catch up with for a very long time. I had no great reason to be going fast, and actually had a very comfortable journey, plenty of capacity, and it didn't cost me much. Everything was fine. Another one of my transport assets is well, I happen to live and go up and down on the East Coast a lot, so you understand, but I have an East Coast first-class lounge pass. And you think all this question about first class, but actually you just get one if you reward the ticket purchase. And I use that to get a train down to Doncaster, have a break, go in and get a coffee, and then get another really cheap train down from Doncaster to London. You can save £100 a time. And so, what am I doing there? I'm responding to the price pressures to travel in ways that are away from the peak, using transport technology and infrastructure more efficiently. And I think I'm very interested in how we might make better use of what we've got in order to make the capacity go further. And that isn't against high speed 2, right? The capacity issues or whatever come to play. But let's make sure transport policy is not only trying to get people to move as fast as possible and get them all moving at once. You can actually do things differently and question. I'm very interested in how we might make better use of travel by night as well. And I think different things can happen to encourage that, make it more acceptable, make it more comfortable, better journeys out of the mix. So a few thoughts there that motivate me.
Thanks very much. David, do you want to give us your thoughts?
Thanks, Keith. I didn't think I was that controversial. I'm going to take an opposite view about digging holes in the ground because I think they're a good thing in the right place. I was a huge supporter of the A3 Hindhead scheme, which was to take a very congested trunk road, the A3 through the Devil's Punch Bowl, which is a beautiful piece of heathland in Surrey, and the Highways Agency eventually succumbed to common sense and built tunnels to take a upgraded road, and now they've been able to restore the heathland to what it was 200 years ago before the first hole went through. I know I love digging holes. I was the despair of my daughters, and I'm absolutely delighted to have 3 grandsons now, because when we go to the beach, we dig big holes to bury the ladies in. But anyway, so I think tunnels aren't bad. The challenge I find is what are we going to do with the dirt that comes out of them to fill in a few places that maybe we don't feel quite so keen. The capacity issue on High Speed 2, let's be clear, it's nothing to do with the number of seats that are available. Although those of us that travel in standard class do sometimes find that a bit of a challenge on coming up from Euston. It's about getting train paths, as Brian alluded to. And I think the publicity and the PR has been dreadful in this respect. Not a few years ago, the local services, certainly to the south of Manchester, were pretty decimated because the introduction of 3 trains an hour on the West Coast Main Line for Virgin pretty well destroyed the ability to run anything other than hourly services out to Stoke and out to Crewe. And I think, and also to Chester, and I think there is an issue about the constraints that has imposed on the growth of Manchester and the ability of people to commute more reasonable times and distances. So I'm looking forward, as a commuter from Cheshire, to see 2 or even 3 trains an hour coming in from Crewe and Stoke, enabling people to move out of the immediate part of Manchester and be able to live and have leisure and maybe even work out there as well. Moving on to innovation, we have a huge problem. Transport generates about 4 million tonnes of CO2 a year in Greater Manchester, and we are supposed to be on target to get that down to about 1.8 million tonnes. So far, we're not doing very well because the number is still going up. Now, if we don't do that, there is going to be, maybe not unreasonably some would say, a certain amount of financial penalty which will be imposed because of our failure to meet those targets. And it is extremely difficult for somewhere like Greater Manchester, without some good, clear national policies, to make a big inroad. So a lot of that is about the energy that's used, a lot of it is about the mix of vehicles we have in the fleet, and the difference between the fact that we have combustion engines and we don't have a big enough proportion of low carbon fuels. And I'm not particularly wedded as to what particular low carbon fuel. If you get a chance to see our stand at the back, you'll see that we've been pushing on with getting electric vehicle charging infrastructure in. But frankly, as hydrogen and other fuels become available and are appropriate for particular vehicle uses, then we'll look to support those as well. So how do we change the composition of the vehicle fleet to try and reduce this CO2 problem? And one of the things that's happened over the last 3 years, and it's sort of crept up on us without even realising it, is about 10% of the bus fleet is now hybrid or pure electric. And that's happened largely because government has provided incentives, but people like ourselves and Stagecoach and First have taken decisions to procure hybrid electric or plug-in electric buses as a deliberate policy. And that is the sort of thing we need to do across the rest of the vehicle fleet. Whether it's commercial vans, whether it's dust carts, whether it's private vehicles, we need to start making those sorts of inroads. Second area is about autonomous vehicles. And this is work which is been quite spectacular in the US in terms of developing the means for driverless vehicles. I'll tell the story about 44-ton HGVs on the M6 in the pouring rain with people behind the wheel playing on their iPads. They seem to me to be pretty driverless. But what we're looking at, of course, is vehicles that are controlled using all the range of sensors and computers that you can put on board, and being able to navigate themselves around routes. Both 4 or 5 years ago they were fixed routes, now they're much more random routes, being told to go from A to B and find an appropriate route through an urban environment. And I'm happy to say that, well, I'm too happy that it's here, but Oxford are pushing on with some trials of that basis. I'd like to see Manchester getting into that. Not just because it's fun to do and you want to see people's faces when a vehicle goes by without a driver behind the wheel, but more about, and this is back to the engineering theme, more because it creates a focus for engineers to look at and develop their skills. Not just automotive engineers and design engineers, but computing engineers and, as importantly, if you like, social engineering as well, because we have to think about how people get used to the idea that there are going to be vehicles roaming the streets, as it were, on the roads. The last thing I wanted to just pick up on is around air quality. And again, air quality is directly related to the health of the people who live in a city region. And the issue for me is best exampled by the plans of the Highways Agency to turn a section of the M60 from roundabout Sale round to Rochdale into what we call a managed motorway. And that is the ability to do variable speeds, to utilise the hard shoulder in times of congestion, and generally build on the work that was being done very successfully on the M42 and is now being implemented on the lower parts of the M6 around Birmingham, to increase the capacity you get on the motorway, but also to reduce the congestion and manage the volume of vehicles through it better. One of the side effects of that is, yes, you can increase the capacity of the road to carry traffic. The other problem is that the air quality gets considerably worse, and there is no mechanism currently being planned, being thought of, as to how we remove or how we manage that and mitigate that, particularly around the M60. And that's a challenge which we have right now, which we want to try and resolve. I'm just wondering whether the Horizon 2020 might be a suitable mechanism to get the right group of people together, sort of making a play that TFGM would be delighted to be part of a group that could start to look at a really serious practical issue for us as to how we, without putting draconian measures in place, how we continue to support the growth of movement of goods and people without, and this is going to happen without decreasing the air quality around there. So that was all I wanted to say. Thank you very much.
I think, I don't know if you wanted to say anything about innovation or what
I would like to chip in actually, and in some senses responding to Brian's comments about education, because in a very real sense I think the source of innovation is people, and in particular young early career people who are full of energy, enthusiasm and creative spark. I also recognise that universities across the UK are busy training engineers who will return to Asia, the Middle East, Sub-Saharan Africa, Latin America, which is a concern to me. I can also reflect from the position of being a school governor. I'm a school governor in a bog standard comp in the suburbs, and I don't think in the past 10 years we've sent any sixth formers to university to study an engineering degree. So there's a problem at that end of the supply chain of engineers. There's also a problem at the other end. I work in this university and I'm keenly aware that we have got a significant number of UK undergraduate engineers, but as they approach their second year, the big finance houses, the big management consultancies are in this university busy trying to recruit all these engineers who've got transferable skills that they can hoover up in those particular sectors. So there's a problem at one end of the pipeline and at the other end of the pipeline for universities. And I think that is a real concern. And I think the answer is too difficult for universities to address. It's right down that supply chain into the schools. You know, why aren't engineers going into schools to encourage teachers to engage with school children around engineering themes? I don't know. Another reflection from this university, I'm sure most of you are aware of this celebrity we have, Brian Cox, who's a physicist. Because of Brian Cox, our physics degrees are completely oversubscribed with A-level applicants with 3-star A-levels, the best A-levels you can get, and they want to come here in a big measure because of Brian Cox. I think there's a need for an engineering Brian Cox equivalent out there who should be out there in the public eye evangelising for the benefits of engineering careers, because until somebody does, this is going to carry on being a major problem. I can also reflect historically. I started life as an engineer and I worked in industry, and this was way back in the 70s, and I worked for a company that was really keen on recruiting graduates from research-led universities because of their skill set, but we also recruited directly from these things we used to call technology colleges. And these people had qualifications called ordinary national certificates and higher national certificates in every different sort of engineering you could imagine. And then there were these things called polytechnics that trained people in higher level certificates and diplomas. And these people could hit the ground running in the sorts of areas that you were talking about, Brian. Graduates from research-led universities struggle to do that because we're not equipping them with those kind of skills. So I think, there's the supply chain, beginning of schools, there's what we do in universities and what is done elsewhere in higher education, as well as the issues around recruitment.
Oh, I agree.
But I tell you what, I'm conscious that Brian has said he will answer some questions, and I also know that he wants to go just after 8 o'clock. So what I'd like to do now is have a barrage of questions for Brian or the other panellists. So if you could raise your hand, somebody will come along and give you a microphone. So maybe we could start with a few questions. If you blather on and make a point, I'll tell you to shut up for now and come back later. So at the front here. Yeah. Thank you.
Will HS2 will freight be able to travel on HS2 just try and bring down the cost to passengers in the normal sort of fares?
The plan as I understand it, and don't forget, this happens in 2030 and a week's a long time in politics, so goodness knows what the time span is in railways. Freight won't. But the point I'm making about the pathways, and it was somebody said about pathways, pathways is crucial. It's not how long is the trains, it helps, I mean, we've all been on platform 14, haven't we, 13 and 14 at Piccadilly at 5 and 6 o'clock, more seating helps, but it's the pathways. A train has a pathway, whether it's 2-car Sprinter or whether it's a Pendolino. What HS2 will do is it will take off some of the strain on the passenger network on the West Coast and therefore give us more pathways. Now I've got to say this, when I say about I like HS2 and I want that to go ahead, that doesn't mean to say I want HS2 to go ahead, oh and by the way we don't do anything then with the West Coast Main Line. It's not an either-or scenario. We've got to invest in the West Coast as well, but clearly not to the levels of HS2. And it is there where we can then create more pathways for the freight trains, taking up the point about more freight trains at night, but you've always got to be careful of that if you're going through urban areas with freight trains in the night. We could even go on to wheel-rail interface and noise, which is where a lot of work, a lot of studies are going on into reduce railway noise as well. But we could release some pathways for freight. Now, if you ever meet Tony Barclay, Lord Tony Barclay, who leads up the rail freight group in Britain, he's been banging on for years that freight trains get the crumbs off the master's table when it comes to pathways. The priority in Britain is always passenger. The United States is the other way around. In the United States, the Amtrak only get pathways that the freight trains don't want. Now, I'm not saying we go that way around, because I can just see Virgin Trains really being happy bunnies at that thought. But what I'm saying is there has to be, for me, there has to be dedicated pathways for freight that freight can use. We can't do it at the moment because the West Coast Main Line is full near as damn it, and certainly will be in the next couple of years. How do we do that? By relieving the congestion on the West Coast Main Line and creating more paths.
Can I have about 2 or 3 more questions if I can see some hands? There's a man in the blue shirt in front here.
Hi Brian, you made a point about the issue of convenience. You want HS2 to be as convenient as the aircraft. But surely cars, for a lot of people, are more convenient. But you make a big play of not pandering to that convenience and trying to get people off the cars. What is the obsession with people using cars and effectively wanting to punish them for that and push them elsewhere?
Right. I don't want to punish them. What I want to do is re-educate them into looking at other forms of transport. At this moment in time, it is easier for somebody to get in their car, to drop the kids off at school and to come back home rather than to walk the kids to school, for example. I live in Warrington. I live 800 metres from a school. 800 metres. But I know most of the parents on the estate where I live drive their kids to school. There's no need to drive the kids to school, I was thinking, going 800 metres. So why do they do it? It's habit. It's because it's become a habit. What I want to try and do is discourage them from doing that. You can't legislate to somebody and say, right, we're banning the car, because I don't think it works. But what we've got to try and do is re-educate them into other forms of public transport. And where you've seen throughout Europe projects that have tried to do that, people have responded, and the shift from car to public transport has happened. And you know, people are happy to do it. But they're not happy to do it if the tram's always packed full, or if the bus is not reliable, or if the train is a pacer unit that should be on my heritage railways, not on the main railway, and where everybody's pushed in a la the Tokyo Underground. That is not convenient for people, because in their own car they can sit there. I always use the example of Warrington to Manchester is a classic. Warrington to Manchester, there's a train every 15-20 minutes. But still, they queue up on the M62 from Burtonwood services to the Salford interchange every morning without fail. Why? We've got to find out why they do that, and then we've got to try and make sure that we respond to that and offer the alternative. So I'm an offering alternatives man, not an anti-car man. God, I have a car of my own, for goodness sake.
I'll just bring David in for a second.
Okay. Just a couple of things, and wholly support what Brian said. So what we're doing is investing a substantial amount of money in providing teams of people who will go out to, and we've targeted the business community because they're the substantial commuters, to do a couple of things. Not only to make them aware of what the alternatives are, but also to give them means to understand how to use them. You may not be surprised, you'd be amazed at the number of people who don't know how to use a bus. Because they've never used one, they've always ridden in the car, then they just don't understand how buses work. It seems pretty simple, those of us who use buses all the time, but actually when you're not used to it, they can be intimidating, they can be uncertain, you may not have the right information. So we've got I think it's 20 people are out talking to businesses, offering programs to help understand how to tell people what's available out there, because quite often getting in the car is the habitual thing. Yeah. And it's not that we want to stop people using the car, we want them to think about the right mix of journey. So we've created, 2,500, 3,000 park and ride spaces by metroing stops. We've got big investment, £20 million over the next 2 or 3 years in cycle infrastructure. Cycleways, hubs where people can store them, training for people who want training for riding in urban environments. But it's changing that behaviour and making that possible is the thing we want to do. And although we're using people at the moment, we really want to get out beyond that so that we can reach more using TV, radio, the internet, Twitter if we can, all of the different mechanisms that people feel comfortable using these days. So that it's a going back several years, I think the government used an expression called nudging people into different ways of behaving. That's what we're trying to do. So there is a real drive to do that. I'll tell you in a couple of years whether it's worked.
Tell you what I'll do now is I'll take 3 or 4 questions from the audience, just in a row, and then I'll bring each of the panel members in to respond to those questions. So if you want to ask a question, just stick your hand up there, and I'll maybe try and take most of you. So the man who's got the microphone first, then the cameraman.
That's unusual, the cameraman asking a question.
You haven't heard him speak yet.
The question is for Mr. Simpson. You were talking about HS2 healing the northern and southern divided area, but eventually what's happened throughout London is that eventually it's becoming larger and larger, it's expanding, and the train services have helped that greatly. But don't you think that by adding HS2, what it's eventually going to do is turn Manchester and Birmingham into a kind of a suburb of the city itself, and what you're actually doing is making it more dependent on London than giving it more individual aura of itself. And I think this has been reinforced by the Professor of Urban Planning and Transport at University College London, where he did present this to the Parliament and to make it. Thank you.
Can we go to the cameraman? Quickly. And then
Manchester is suburb of London.
Whenever I come to a transport discussion, I'm always incredibly struck by the disconnect between transport wants, the policymakers, the people who are involved as experts in the transport discussion, and what you call ordinary people in their daily lives. And I'd like to ask the panel what their view is of Jeremy Clarkson, hero or villain. Because it seems that Jeremy Clarkson is incredibly popular with the ordinary person, or maybe not incredibly popular, but much more popular than any transport policy one I can think of.
I've come across it. I remember chairing a debate once where I had the producer of Top Gear on, and that really fired the discussion.
Yeah, thanks Steve. Just a thought. We were talking about incentives before and how to nudge people out of the cars. Just make a little point. I've got a bus stop right outside my house, but I need a car occasionally, so I have to have a car. Now, I can use the bus, it's nearly an hour's journey to work. The trouble is, when I use the bus, the car is costing me £400 a year to insure and nearly £300 a year to tax. It's still being paid for while I sat there off the road doing nothing. If I could pay for that for every journey, then I might think twice about using the car as opposed to the bus. So until we take some of those restrictions away, maybe things might not change.
I think the man next to you will ask it.
Brian, I could possibly answer your question about why I sit on the M62.
Yeah.
The alternative to travel in, it costs about £18 return from Halewood into Manchester. The trains are less than once an hour, I believe, from that point. And the trains that go more quickly than the hour-long journey don't stop at the same station.
Yeah.
So you take me from one station, but only back to the other. The cost, Philip Rutland, I was at the launch of the Capital the other day, was very, very proud of the fact that British transport companies and rail is the most profitable one in the world, and the only profitable one in Europe. Is that not actually a bad thing? Does that not mean we're paying too much on it?
Was there something else you wanted to ask a question? We've got these two here, and then I'll bring the panel in.
The question that I have is consideration of the broader benefit of HS2. A lot of studies have attributed the Japanese economic miracle to the development of Shinkansen after the Second World War. And in these days, there is more high-speed rail in China than in USA and Europe put together. Now, those two examples, if you like, correlate with big economic growth. Yet here we are making an argument for HS2 perhaps less on the economical ground or the prospect of economic development, but on the convenience, which is perhaps biases people's choices. Biases, however, say using the convenience of the car as opposed to using the rail. So, what is the study of the economic benefit, perhaps in 10 years' time, 5 years' time scale, as opposed to the sort of immediate individual benefit?
And then if you take the microphone forward to the man in the purple shirt.
Hi, it's just a controversial idea for discouraging people from using cars. Perhaps engine control units could be designed to look out for large quantities of short journeys and then disable or slow down the cars if they exceed a certain value.
Well, I'm trying to remember them all. And I mean, the first point I'd make is I think it's 20% of all car journeys in the UK are less than 5 kilometres in length. I think that's a generally accepted figure, and I think in Europe probably the same. But I also want to make the point that what you were saying, you know, there's some parts of the UK where you have to have a car, you know. We're talking here, obviously, because we're in Manchester about urban transport and urban mobility. You've got to remember, I also represent the Lake District, you know, and there are great tracks of the Lake District there where they see a bus once a week. So we have to remember that, and that's why I'm not kind of anti-car. Jeremy Clarkson, hero or villain? Jeremy Clarkson's good at what he does. He's a motoring fanatic, loves his cars. You know, I'm a steam railway fanatic. Don't mean say I wear an anorak everywhere I go, but you know, it's about getting the balance. Do I think Clarkson is controversial and does he do it on a purpose? Yes, he does, but that's just because he's a celebrity type thing. I've never seen him yet come out with a transport policy though. So if he comes out with one, I'd be more than happy to have a look at it. The cameraman, what did he? That was Clarkson, wasn't it? The cameraman. I forgot. What was yours on?
The divide between the north and
south. Oh, the north. Manchester is a suburb of London. No, I don't see. I can't see that happening anyway. I mean, look, I come from Wigan, and we still think we're in Lancashire. We don't like being Greater Manchester. Never mind. You know, I come from Goulburn. Do you know Goulburn? Goulburn in Greater Manchester is like Malta to the EU. It's that little speck right on the far end that everybody forgets about, particularly transport for Greater Manchester. We have 4 railway lines running through Goulburn, but we don't have a train. You know, just thought I'd make the plug for Goulburn. So I don't see that happening. I think what you could have people who move out of London because of property prices and so on, and it becomes more attractive to live up here. But guys, crikey, I've been saying it for 50 years, it's more attractive to live up here than down in London, for God's sake. Bloody hell, they have dry food down there, don't they? They don't know what a mushy pea is. And, you know, and their culture is very limited, and they play their own kind of rugby, so it would be educational to bring them out of London if that could happen. I forgot the question.
Was paying for your car tax
insurance while you're riding the I'm a great user pays principle. Do I agree with tolls on motorways? Yes, I do, but not in addition to a road tax. You cannot tax people twice. So if you're going to go for user pays, drop the road tax. Now, of course, straight away, George Osborne, just down the road, he'll be having a heart attack with that. I also believe in ring fencing, taxes collected from transport to be put into transport. Second heart attack for the Chancellor of the Exchequer. Because believe you me, I have met so many transport ministers who tell me what we need, not British, I'm talking European now, what we need is more investment in transport, and then when they become the finance minister, it's if though somebody's changed the chip behind the ear and all of a sudden there's never any money. So what we have to do is, I think, do you know we have one ring-fenced tax in the UK? It's the TV licence fee. And they're even talking about dishing that out amongst others now. So I think we should ring-fence certain amounts of money from road tolling that goes back into public transport. But you cannot have road tolling on the one hand and then charge people for road tax on the other. You can't double jeopardy, if you want to use a term. And what was yours? I can't remember the question.
Railways are so profitable.
I think railways should be. I'm not against railways being profitable. What I'm against is the profit going straight to the shareholders and not put back into the railways. And it's the same when you get this cosy deal between Network Rail and some of the operators. what benefits are gained from that, what savings should be put back into the passengers in reducing the passage, because our railways are the most expensive in the world. It might be 22 quid coming up from London if you get the last train or 4:30 in the morning or whatever.
1805?
Yeah, well that's but have you tried the 17 whatever it is before that and see what it is? You've got to be, I don't know if anybody reads Rail magazine, but there's a guy there called Barry Doe. Now Barry's the only guy I know that can fathom out rail first, because nobody else in the world can. We need a simplified rail first structure that, gives you your offbeat, gives you your peak ones as well, but it should be one that ends the nonsense of me paying whatever. I could pay 300, 400 quid for a first class return from Warrington Banquet, and he could be sat next to me for 22. We've got to sort that structure out on rail first, and we've got to get back to the consumer being a major player in what the rail first structure is, because under the privatised system, of course, they've got shareholders they've got to go to and answer to, as well as still dipping out the public, but that we spend more now, I think it is, on our railways from the taxpayer than we did when it was British Rail. And one of the great ironies of British Rail, when I remember British Rail, some of you are not young enough to remember British Rail, but the older ones of us remember British Rail, and everybody used to say how rubbish it was, and how terrible it was, and how disgraceful it was. Get rid of it. Now people are telling me, bring back British Rail, all is forgiven. Kind of reminds me of President Tito in Yugoslavia. When he was there, nobody wanted him and they wanted to get rid of him. And after he died, they said, bring back Tito, all is forgiven. So it's, it's about a balance. And the balance at the moment is not with the passenger or the freight user. When you have Network Rail, with a policy that says in order to encourage more freight on rail, we will charge coal trains and iron ore trains more because they're wearing out the track. That shows you the mentality that is going on with Network Rail. And in that regard, it's the rail regulator that should be frankly getting off his backside a bit more and doing more for rail users rather than rail companies.
Thanks, but I don't know if you can stay for a bit longer or you have to.
I've got 5 minutes, I can shoot off to catch me train. I just thought I'd mention it.
I'll let some of the other panelists respond to some of the questions. Start this one, work on.
Yeah, sure. Jeremy Clarkson, as far as I'm concerned, he's a clown and an entertainer. He might masquerade as a villain, but primarily I think he's a clown. On the nudge issue, I think that's particularly interesting. I think at the root of a lot of this is behavioural change. One of the things that interests me is people do not hesitate to give to charity. They give to charity knowing that their little donation will make a difference, will help alleviate harm somewhere, will help prevent harm somewhere. Man-made climate change causes harm. It causes harm to some of the poorest people in the world, and it will cause harm to some of the poorest people in the world for hundreds of years. Yet, for some reason, people will not change their behaviour with respect to their carbon emissions. And is part of it because they don't realise at a visceral level that they are causing harm to people elsewhere in the world and to people in the future. Part of the answer, I think, is some kind of innovation is to make people realise that your responsibility to people far away and people in the future is exactly the same when it comes to carbon emissions as it is when you give to charity. Most people give to charity. Far fewer people will change their behaviour with their love affair with their car. It's
a status symbol as well, isn't it?
Peter, do you want to say?
Okay. I think Jeremy Clarkson, in a way, I look at my, I only introduced Jeremy Clarkson really, but my 15-year-old son, who even sort of had the television on. My son watches him, likes watching him, but I think young people are sufficiently, they're picking up some things about his generation and the attitudes of that generation, and they're sort of laughing at him. And also, I think that means that some of the young people are starting talking sensible transport policy. They're aware of what's happening to insurance, and they're no longer latching on in the way that other generations of mine have latched on to the car. And so my son, I find, is thinking very sustainably and thinking about his own independence and whatever. And I think we need to get behind that sort of thing. Now, in terms of changing behaviour and attitudes, who rides on buses and why do people sit in traffic jams rather than get on the bus, very interesting to see that it's acceptable for all classes of society to use buses in Edinburgh and London. And pretty much not everywhere else. It hasn't caught on to the same degree. Why is that? And what can we do to get that behavioural acceptance? I use buses in very much around, but quite often, if I'm wearing my student tie and briefcase and feel that perhaps people think I've drunk drive and not got my licence, and that's the reason why I'm on the bus. So you're stigmatised, and unfortunately some of the transport policy that gives a lot of concessionary fares for on the buses and children, students and whatever, they feel they're on the bus by some sort of handout. These are the sort of things we've got to try and change. I think in terms of, yes, simplify the fares, but on the other hand, don't take away one of the mechanisms of using fares and giving information about fares so people know what to decide. Part of the problem you're describing, I feel, is that people don't know which fare to get, how to get the best out of it, and that is the problem. Differentiation of fares is what the airlines do, and it is what can drive efficiency out of the resources that we've got available. So very much trying to do that and get the best out of the system by information and informing people about what's available.
London are terrified that the people who live there and in the southeast find out about the glories of the Midlands and the Northwest and Leeds. And a year ago I was said about the football as well, but maybe not at the moment. So there is I don't think it's a fear of people commuting into London. I think it's about London and the businesses in London, and we already see that in would invest in Greater Manchester and Leeds and Birmingham. Businesses, because I think because of the work the airport has done, actually people realise coming here, working here, they've got skill base, they've got talent, they've got quality of life, which is at least as good as most of London and exceeds a huge amount. So I don't think that's a big issue. Jeremy Clarkson, I think, yeah, he's an entertainer. I did see him get very excited about an electric car. You probably saw it as well. It was a Mercedes SLS, and he was driving it at 150 miles an hour and making a lot of smack out of tires. Great, I don't mind. That's a big difference from 2 years ago when he tried to drive an electric vehicle up to Lincoln and made a complete nonsense of it. So he's there to, give us something to talk about the following day. The question about the car sitting on the drive, I think we'll see a change of behaviour from people needing to own cars, and if you only want to use it now and again, use a car club. Rent a car for a short period. Use a car that's available on the street, pick it up, use it, leave it somewhere else, wherever you've been to, and then come out and find it. You've got the applications in San Diego, in Antwerp, they're trying an experiment in Birmingham. These are the sorts of mechanisms and ownership models which are going to change the way people have to feel about cars. Look at the decrease in car ownership between 18 and 32-year-olds in cities over the last 5 years. It's dropping like a stone because they've worked out they don't need to pay for lots of depreciation. They can get around without that. And if they need one, they can get one of the type they want. I was going to talk about the tax take. The Chancellor's terrified because over the next 10 years, the tax take from petrol is going to go through the floor. So he's going to have to find another mechanism to raise taxes from motorists and disregard Eric Pickle's clear advice. Energy control units, brilliant. I'd like to see air quality control units as well. And maybe not stop them running, but maybe put a meter in there and let people know what they're costing, and it's about the impact on the environment. And we should be, you know, there's technology that will allow us to do that. Yeah, I can't help you coming from Halewood.
I used to live on Mackett's Lane. I lived on Mackett's Lane in Halewood, so I know Halewood very well.
Does anyone in the audience want to respond to anything they've heard? And make a few points. I think I should let the camera. He's doing a fine job in filming you.
Yeah, the third speaker on the panel mentioned that you know, engineers want to inspire engineers, and to his credit, he got a small round of applause. But surely the transport discussion is the most uninspiring discussion of anything, because it's all about problems and discouraging people from using their car, and the car's a problem, and we've got this challenge. Even HS2 is described as a solution to a sort of congested train route, as if we have to support it because there's literally no alternative. There doesn't seem to be any inspiration for a positive vision of the future. And the second point, I must come back to this car use, because, you know, Jeremy Clarkson, just coming back to Jeremy Clarkson as well, he's always seen as prejudiced and a bit ignorant. But I'd suggest that there's a massive prejudice amongst the transport policy community against the car. And I'd say it had three aspects: that the car's not sustainable, because it's, you know, petrol, diesel. What about the electric car? The car's not environmentally friendly. Well, who really cares about air quality? I don't know anyone who's interested in air quality. And thirdly, there seems to be a prejudice that it's simply not possible to build more roads to enhance the use of cars. And it just seems to be three massive prejudices.
I absolutely take issue.
I'm going to have to go. All I'd say to you is the more you build, the more you fill with roads.
I think we should give Brian a round of applause.
I take issue on a number of points there. Amongst transport people, there is not a massive prejudice about the car. There was 10 years ago. And that has changed radically because we've understood now that there is a balance in the way transport can be used and the different forms of transport that we've now got. And that's, you know, that's as it is. In terms of inspiration and not just looking at the problems, sadly, we have to spend some of our time looking at the problems. We also have to spend a lot of time, one of my people is in the audience, Peter can stand up and tell you himself, but we also have to spend a lot of time looking for different and new ways of helping people use the transport network in ways that they need to use it. Whether that's to get cheaper journeys, better informed journeys, cleaner journeys, more sustainable journeys, whatever it is. That's what we're there to do. And that leads to people's well-being. And again, I take issue with you about people who care about air quality. My daughter cares about air quality because she's pushing our grandson, whilst he's not crying, but it's hers when he does, in a pushchair, on a road, at the same level as most exhaust pipes. And that's a real issue because potentially he's taking in an awful lot of pollutants. She doesn't do that because I've got her to go to the inside of the pavement and avoid it. But it's issues, you wouldn't say that the growing number of children and now adults with asthma don't take notice of what the air quality is like, whether it's around the roads where they travel or walk, and that's an issue for them. And they worry about air quality all the time. So we worry about it because we know the problem's going to get worse, and we have to find a way of mitigating that and doing something about it if we want to protect the children in the future.
Although I think the man with the camera's going to point out one thing, the thing that the big idea that interested me in transport was Neil Armstrong landing on the moon. And the American government, when they put forward the program for the space race, said we go to the moon because we can and because we can do all these other things as well. And there's a point that Brian made, is we do need some really big ideas to excite people on this debate and not being detached from people's day-to-day lives. So we've got to excite and engage and inspire around this. So, woman in the red dress.
Thank you. Just to say, I work in transport. 50,000 deaths per year can be attributed to air quality. So air quality is a big issue, and actually we should really make more importance of it. So that's a big factor as part of the well-known statistic. I absolutely agree with you about inspiring, and it just comes across perceptually that we're just about solving problems. What we need to do is make a move away with school leavers, those at undergraduate level, those coming out of university, that engineering and technology is a career choice. It's not just about getting your hands dirty, it's something that can be seen and taken you around the world, designing solutions for people to use transport in their everyday lives, and seeing transport, whether it's railway, marine, aerospace, or automotive, as something that's a total transport solution, because we all use it. We can't get away from it. The car's not going away. In fact, in my world, there's very little prejudice to the automotive industry or cars. In fact, aerospace is the one that has the biggest prejudice because it's the biggest polluter, and it's just not maritime bigger. So we do need to change perceptions and behaviours about transport. There needs to be a lot more young professionals being the Brian Coxes, the role models, out there for the next generations coming through. But you're right, I think there are companies and organisations as well that can actually help to change the image of engineering and technology, so it's seen as a career choice and not something by default and something that the financial sector can't just see the march on.
Just in front of Manuel.
Yeah, I was really quite surprised by a comment from TFGM about air quality. We have been looking carefully at the extension of Metrolink to Manchester Airport, and the route has involved ripping up woodland in several areas, and there very little seems to be done to replace that woodland that's being lost. Just planting of a few little twigs, not the replacement of good quality trees that have been there for years that have helped clean the atmosphere. Is this a change in TFGM's policy regarding air quality?
Well, yes, I really just respond to that. I warm to the issue. We must make the discussion much more positive about transport, and I think in transport decisions and investments, let's really be sure that we're getting the improvement that we think we're getting. I'm concerned when we discuss high speed 2 and that sort of thing. What are we trying to achieve? And it would be, if we are consigning, in fact, more people to the drudgery of commuting into London, and that's the principal thing that you're facilitating by it, then that would be possibly a very negative thing. So I think you'd be very careful what you're consigning people to. Are we on some treadmill that's been created by transport policy in the past that we're all forced to travel more and more? We might not have wanted to be consigned to all the transport that we are finding we're having to do. So I think transport is a very good thing, but let's make sure through pricing and the correct access to it and the use of it, that we use it sparingly and wisely so that we truly derive the benefits to the economy, to the north, and to the environment that we're hoping from the transport investments that we're making. I think often we failed to do that in the past.
Did you want to say something?
Yes. The air quality is more important to us now. That's my fault. and that's come about over the last 2 or 3 years. I'm also responsible for our environment policy, and again, that's changed over the last 2 or 3 years, so we now have a much better approach to biodiversity. If I tell you when I went to TFGM 6 years ago now, our approach was basically, as you describe it, Will, there was no categorisation of the type of woodland, of the type of trees, of the type of plants that were being taken out under the construction, and indeed what was going back in. It was a sort of, we'll put some twigs back in, but so, and we found situations where trees have been replanted and then they died, and we've gone to the contractor and said, hang on a second, you've gone to the trouble of planting these trees, they've died, didn't you think to feed or water them? Oh, that wasn't in the contract. And so we are trying very hard, to get our procurement people and our contracts people to get the industry to understand they have a role to play. It isn't just us who should lay down the standards. They, as good contractors, should be doing that anyway as part of what their contribution to what's going on. And they need to do that in a much more flexible contractual approach and not do it as, oh, that would be a change request, another £1 million. So, yes, you're probably right. There have been some mistakes. I'm hoping that we're getting much better now. Incidentally, I've set a challenge to our organisation that in the planning and development of the line that's going out through Trafford Park to Salford, Port Salford, that it's a zero carbon tram service, tram line. And that includes all of the construction as well as all the operational running of the total picture. Now that's something which is causing a little bit of consternation, as you can imagine, amongst the rather more reactionary engineers and designers. But I think it's a bit like going to the moon as far as we're concerned. It's the closest we'll get. But if we can start to get that thinking into the way we commission work and do work, I think we'll make a massive contribution to to the environment in Greater Manchester.
If we can go to the man in the suit there and then to the blue shirt in front.
Yeah, I'd like to pick up on this concept of vision after a 30-odd year career in transport. I think it is certainly true to say that some of the characters that led the industry at one stage have disappeared and haven't been replaced by people with equivalent impact. But could I also put the view that maybe we don't want to see big visionary programs dominating the political and social agenda, because I put to you the alternative view, that a good transport system is perhaps rather like a good Premier League referee. They enable the game to go on, because transport, after all, apart from we enthusiasts, is not something that people engage on in by choice. You are using transport to get to something else, be it work, be it leisure, be it visiting friends and relatives, whatever, that you really want to do. You don't really want, as I say, you're an enthusiast, you don't really want to be spending 4.5 hours, although Peter has found ways of using that time profitably. So that's the first thought. The second thought is, we keep on talking about transport in terms of personal transport. Now, for a successful economy, we actually need to move goods around efficiently. And certainly in the UK, but I think in many parts of the developed world, we don't actually give enough attention to the efficiency with which goods are moved. My personal take on HS2 is yes, we need to free up capacity. But don't let's say that allows more freight to move on the West Coast main line or any of the other main lines, because those are gauge constrained. If we're building new railways, let's for heaven's sake build them so that they can take lorries on the back of trains, that we can get environmental efficiency that way. Let's plan and build them so that we can have the largest boxes that the sea companies are going to be bringing back into. And let's get back to the days when, remember, our railway system is basically built for freight and not for passengers. And the same has largely been true of all transport innovation from the days of the Romans onwards. Thank you.
I was going to go to the man in the blue shirt next, and then if there's anyone else who wants to make any points before I bring the panel in to wind up, could you show your hands now so I've just got one. Okay.
It'd be nice if the panel could explain what they mean by the word sustainable or sustainability. Because for me, the way that you've been using it is in a way to inconvenience people or to punish people. And it's a cover word, really. I think if you look back over the video, if you replace the word sustainable with it will allow us to be possible, I think you'll get a pretty much one-for-one correlation. Because everything that follows, we've got to be sustainable, means that we've got the capacity and the excuse to be possible and to boss people around. And I think the thing about Jeremy Clarkson, why he stands out as a hero for a lot of people, albeit he's a clown, but the thing that stands out about him is his very fluid sense of freedom and not being tied to a sense of sustainability, straitjacket, and everything like that. And just a belief that innovation is going to solve these problems. Going back to what this discussion is all about, it's all about being innovative and thinking about the innovation for the future. Everything that follows your sustainability seems to be how we can avoid doing something big and grand and enabling people for the convenience that they want. And it's all about how we can punish them in one way or another.
So I've got money in the middle there, and then I think that'll be, I'll come back to the panel after that, and that'll be it.
Thanks, Steve. Yeah. It's a shame that Brian's gone because I have a question for him, and it's to do with why he thinks it's a nonsense the whole air quality issue. It's probably a sad fact that in spite of all the work David's doing at TFG and many other cities around the UK about air quality, many are probably not going to reach the targets in the time that they've got. So what happens then? Europe come along and take a bit of a dosh in terms of fines back to Europe, out of the country. Money that would actually be better spent tackling the problem rather than trying to remove it from our press local authorities who don't have the money and yet still have to address air quality in spite of all the other things they have to deliver as well. So I was going to ask Brian, what do Europe then do with that money? Does it come back to us eventually to help us with the problem again, or is it just lost out and can't be forever? How can they solve the problem?
Just before I bring the speakers in, I'll just give my thought on the air quality issue, because it is, I suppose, it is a subject I specialise in. So, to give you a sense of what the problem is air quality in Britain at the moment is the best that it's been since the Industrial Revolution. However, the standards by which we judge ourselves now are the most severe they ever have been, which means we're trying to achieve a level of air pollution that is safe for everyone at any time, which is not the level we set ourselves in the past. So where David is right is that the legal framework in which we set ourselves as a European Union is now very tight and very severe, which is why when we're building major or even trying to just use a lane we didn't use before on a motorway, we're running into these air quality problems, because the air quality is much better, which is why it's not talked about so much as it was when we had these super fogs. But actually, the standards and the legislation we're trying to meet is much more difficult to meet than it ever has been. And that's the dilemma. So I welcome projects to look at that and actually be quite innovative so we can do what we want to do and address the problems. But that's just an aside. I'll come back to the panel in the same order. And
I'll be very quick because I've got 5 minutes before my train breaks. So sustainability is indeed a contested concept. We teach whole lecture courses on the definition of sustainability. At its simplest to me, sustainability is about the health and wellness of planet Earth, and it's as simple as that. And I'm sorry, I'm going to have to go.
okay. Well, shall we give him a round of applause?
Well, I'm sure my train's gone, so, but not to worry. People don't like to be told what to do. And so very much being involved in the information side of things, it's giving people the information so they choose to do what they want to do. But if the right mechanisms are there, as a transport economist, then the financial incentives behind those choices will encourage people to do the right thing in a pure economic sort of free market. So I'm quite concerned when the public sector or the government is going to sort of lob in millions of pounds into that to say that is how the investment will be determined. Because the concern is that that is effectively what you're being told to do. You must travel on high speed 2, and that is where the government will spend our money. So I'm not against high speed 2, but let's see that the information flows that behind it are truly supporting sensible and sustainable decisions that people want to do, and they get sort of good transport out of it. They get good outcomes because they've used transport that is there for the right things, and they don't get bound up in the way our society, our spatial surroundings are being laid out, so we have to use them in a certain way because the big investment in transport determines how you use the spaces around you. So let's keep it for sustainable. Let's really focus on what people are wanting to achieve out of this, and let's ensure that the public policies are following that. And information at the really grassroots level is core to that people really know what's available. And that's where these cheap travel options come that I mentioned earlier. They're available as long as you can find them. Let's make better ways for people to find them and get really good outcomes.
We have to do both the big projects and the small ones, and that's what we try and do. That's why I enjoy coming to events like this, because on each of these boards there are some absolutely brilliant ideas, some of which we can take forward and make use of. Some of them are probably beyond that which we're able to actually utilise. But that's what it is. It's about the big infrastructure, but it's also about the smaller things we can do. We have a big, strong approach about the use of open data, and that's because I want to make sure that we're engaging with all of the communities around, not just in this country but elsewhere as well, because we've got a German doing an isochrome of travel times in Greater Manchester, which is fascinating. So it is the small things that have sometimes an inordinate impact on what we're trying to deliver. Sustainability for me is about the use of transport to not just in a short-term basis, but in something that is that I, as an individual, can keep going economically, i.e. I can afford to pay for it and I can get use out of it and value out of it over a reasonable period of time. And it's not just about the environment, but it is about the economy and what I want to do with the particular forms of transport that I might choose to own, or I might want to hire, or I might want to just go and buy a ticket. So for me, sustainability is a whole rounded thing, as Colin indicated. The freight issue is absolutely core. You may know that there's a lot of hype at the moment around smart cities or future cities, and a lot of columnage being written. The thing that's quite frightening is the amount of time that isn't spent in those forums talking about the movement of goods, of freight, and how we do that more effectively in sometimes very crowded Victorian streets, sometimes in areas where lots of people live, and you don't really want nighttime deliveries to the superstore or whatever it is. And we don't also think very well at the moment about mixing different modes of moving goods around. We still have a fantastic resource in the Manchester Ship Canal, which has been pretty underused for the last 50 or 60 years. Why are we not, as Manchester, working much more closely with Liverpool in terms of supporting the development of their port, but only because it acts as a gateway to bring goods and services into where we need it and where we want it. In the same way, picking up a point earlier, the investment in the Northern Hub on the rail piece isn't about passenger services, it's about creating paths for freight traffic on the railway to move not just around Greater Manchester, but also east and west between Liverpool and the East Coast ports. So there is, and then we'll charge a carriage across. But there are lots of things about freight which we haven't yet picked up on, which we are beginning to apply. The fines we pay for the EU will vanish. We won't see them. I could make a cheap shot about that going to the MEP's expenses, but I wouldn't demean myself like that. And the problem is trying to get the attention of the, if you like, both the political as well as the executive leadership to understand that it will happen. It's not a maybe, it's not a free choice. The government has been told very clearly all of the excuses they've given for the last 4 or 5 years are as nothing. You've actually got to do something, and here is the date, and here are the sort of sums of money that are involved. And the sort of sums of money involved are going to work out over a 10-year period at least equal to what we've spent on Metrolink over the last 5 or 6 years. So we're talking about hundreds of millions of pounds vanishing out of our economy, and really we can do something to avoid that. Now, I don't know jumping in my car and drive that.
Well, I think we should give a round of applause for the speakers who stayed to the end and the speakers who've been here before. And just before we all go, I think we should also give some thanks to the organisations that have been involved in organising this. So from my perspective, from the Institution of Engineering and Technology, I helped put this event on, but actually without the other organisations it wouldn't have happened. I think special thanks should go to Manchester University Business School, who've done most of the organisation and also put on not just the debate, but also the poster event before it, and there was another event before that, all in the space of one day, which I think is not just showing there's innovation in transport, but it's showing there's innovation in organising meetings. The Manchester Chamber of Commerce were very important in their support for this, because they were the ones that brought Brian along, who I think livened the room greatly by putting forward his views. But also I think it's very important that Manchester Salon were involved in this, because I think it's very good that we actually debate the subjects and we get to the bottom of what issues of innovation are like. And Manchester Salon do a very good job in not just bringing debates about transport to light, but debates around a wide range of subjects as well. So I think all the organisations pulling together, I believe, has put on a very good event today. But where my most thanks go is to the people who stayed to the end and the people who come earlier, who've come here rather than being trick or treated somewhere else. So hopefully you have a nice safe journey home and don't get too scared by the ghouls and goblins that are out there waiting for you. Thank you for coming.